No, and I mean, while you're explaining that story, I'm just kind of thinking like, because I'm picturing when you say house, like I'm picturing like a normal house. Can these things just be happening like at your neighbor's house next door? Like what areas of the US, the world, like are these things happening in?
Yeah, great questions. Suburbs, cities, it's happening all over the place. There's actually, I think I mentioned this to you when we talked before that I work with a nonprofit, Radical Empathy. So at Radical Empathy, we use a virtual reality headset to put you in the place of a 14-year-old girl who's been coerced into sex trafficking. And so you're in her world. She's narrating what it is that's happened. And it starts off in the suburbs. And we did that intentionally because a lot of cases start off in the suburbs. It starts off with this girl, her parents were divorced, so she was feeling, lonely and isolated. Her world wasn't making sense. So while she was online on her computer, she was talking to this guy and she, let on that she was upset and he told her that he would care for her and all this other stuff, all the right stuff. And so then she ends up finding herself then in the city, and then you see her now in the city, and again you're like completely immersed in this world, and she's kind of walking you through what her day-to-day life looks like. And just as an example, there was one girl, I do not remember how old she was. I think she had to be like 11 to 13, something like that, so it was pretty young. And the boy who lived in the cul-de-sac. So she would go stay at her grandmother's house in the summers. And the boy who was in the cul-de-sac was trafficking her out of, I don't know if it was out of his house when like the parents weren't there during the daytime or something like that. Like he would have some kind of guys coming over to the house. And I think he was only a teenager. He was like 18 or 17 or something like that. But he was taking advantage. I mean, this is right there in the suburbs that this is happening. Going back to the massage parlors, there's massage parlors in local neighbor. I mean, I have a massage parlor that's down the street, 4 miles away from my house. I don't know if anything illicit's happening there, but I do know this. One of the like really prominent suburbs outside of Chicago is Naperville. So again, if you don't know, just Google Naperville. You'll see like it's like the median income is skyrocketing. Everybody has degrees. It's like rated like the number two community in the US. It's that community. And no shade towards Naperville. So if anybody lives in Naperville, just saying it's a very prominent community. And I have a friend who is an executive director at a small nonprofit that works against human trafficking in DuPage County, which is where Naperville is. And I asked her, I was like, where would you say are the most massage parlors that have illicit activity? And now she goes all the way up to Milwaukee, so she covers a pretty wide range of where she's going. And she said, "Oh, Naperville," and she's like, "There's at least 11 massage parlors that are in there that are having illegal activity." So if you figure each massage parlor has 4 to 5 women that are working there, and you multiply that by 11, I mean, you're talking like 50, 60 people in just one town. Now that's one town with, I think Naperville has, I want to say like 200,000 people, something like that, or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's like 150 or something like that. In any case, there's 316 million people in this country. So what's the demand for illegal sex? Out of all of that, I think I read something somewhere before that said even if it was just 1% of men demanded sex with somebody who's being prostituted or illegal sex, sex trafficking, that would be enough to support where we're currently at. And I believe the number was actually closer to like 20% of men at some point in their life had paid for sex. So, which is pretty astonishing. Again, I can't give you my exact source for that, so take that with a grain of salt. I will tell you that, but when when I recall it, I remember I was reading it from a fairly legitimate source, and I was like, that is mind boggling if that's true. Um, and just giving like a personal story to that, I used to work. I used to work at a restaurant in the mall, and when I worked at it was my early 20s or something like that. And I was really good with the line cooks, and I always joked around with them and had a good time. And one of them was joking around, and he's like, "Hey, you should come out and party with us. We go out to this place. And when we go there, every couple of weeks they always have new girls, and they always love to dance with you. And I'm like, no, I'm good. And he's like, yeah, yeah. He's like, they like to dance with you. He's like, they like to do more than just dancing. And I'm like, no, I'm good, man. I'm like, that sounds like like I've never been like a big partier, so it's like that's not my scene. And then I think about it years later, and I'm like, the fact that there was new girls coming in all the time, the party, as he called it, was just at an apartment. It was at an apartment. What apartment's having the same party every 2, 3 weeks, and there's always new girls that are coming in there? And so, you know, are there apartment brothels? Yeah, absolutely there are. Are there girls, women, being forced to walk the tracks as they call it? Yeah, that's happening too. There's escort services. There's massage parlors. There's actually a really great article put together by Polaris. If you just Google typology of modern day slavery, and then Polaris, it'll pull up for you that there's 25 different types of human trafficking that's taking place in the U.S. right now. And, there's a dozen or so, or just about a dozen different forms of sex trafficking that's taking place, like sex trafficking in bars, sex trafficking in apartments and the brothels. And it's wild how they can find so many different ways to hurt people and to try to profit off of it. So.
Well, and I've heard a lot about how with trafficking and like those situations you're explaining where people feel like this is kind of their only outlet and this is somebody who is providing them shelter or income. So it's hard for them to realize what's happening, and therefore it's hard for them to think that they actually need help or seek out that help. So for somebody who's, maybe not being trafficked and they have a friend maybe who is, like, what are red flags that maybe that friend is being trafficked or maybe even your child is being trafficked? Like, what are things to kind of look out for?
Yeah, that's great, and it's because me and my business partner, because we started our own company to do online education about human trafficking. Um, we always say that prevention is best because if you can tell people about these red flags and things ahead of time. So if somebody's asking you to keep, so if I was talking to a kid, right, which I'm actually writing a kid's book right now, so it's like if somebody's asking you to keep secrets, if they're not respecting your body boundaries, which you define for your kids what body boundaries are, if they make you feel unsafe, if if they're asking you to be alone somewhere, adults shouldn't be asking kids for help, right? Like, oh, can you come over and help me with my car? Can you help me catch my puppy? Can you help me with this, bag of candy or whatever it possibly is? Um, those are kind of the things that if there's an adult talking to you online, right? Like that's a red flag that you have right there too. So I think for adults though, like how can you identify that somebody's being groomed? Are they being isolated? And this still applies to kids too. But are they being isolated? Are they spending less and less time with their friends? Is their appearance starting to change? Um, are they starting to skip out on responsibilities that they previously would have held to, whether it's grades, showing up to work on time, keeping a hold of their money, appearance? Do they are they not answering their own questions? Right? Do they always defer to somebody else? Are they being secretive? So it's just kind of things that you can see that people are pulling away from who they normally are, right? And like obviously this can be other things. That's the thing that's so tricky about human trafficking. Why is it people would rather have zip ties and napkins on gas station, to be able to identify what human trafficking is? Because if somebody's pulling away and being really reclusive, and maybe also you can see like bruises or something like that, that could be a sign of it as well. It could be, minus the bruises, it could be that they're going through depression. It could be that they're having some kind of turmoil at home. Like if it's a youth, it could be that their parents are arguing a lot or going through a divorce. And while that might set them up as a vulnerability to be trafficked, that's not a sign that they're actually being trafficked. So there's risk factors, or if they want to call it, like people call them red flags a lot. They don't, they don't say it doesn't determine that you are 100% being trafficked, but the more of those red flags you see, the more of a risk that it is that somebody is being trafficked, right? So as you see all of that stack up, so if you have a youth who's used to care about school and now they don't, if they used to play their video games and now they're never home, if they used to really care about their appearance and now they don't seem to, if it seems like they're getting, more involved with drugs, the people that they're hanging out with aren't the friends that they've had for years. Again, your kid getting on drugs does not mean that they're doomed to be involved in sex trafficking, but in a constellation of different traits kind of signals that there's something going on there. And I think what it really comes down to is with any of this, whether it's an adult or a kid, you're going to have to be there with somebody. You're not going to rescue somebody from sex trafficking. So the same lady that I was telling you that told me about Naperville having 11 different massage parlors, she gave me the best thing ever when it came to human trafficking, because I will say I thought of human trafficking in the sense that I was like, I want to rescue 1 million slaves in my lifetime. That's what I want to do. Like, I can die happy knowing that I saved 1 million people. And that is such a hero complex, because when she told me, she's like, I was like, you're such an amazing person, Anne. And she's like, no, she's like, I just stand beside people. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of saying it, because she's taking all the credit away from herself, as she should be. And what she's doing is still great, but it's that person who's coming off of all this trauma that's choosing to walk away, that's choosing to leave that situation. Again, whether they were relying on that trafficker, pimp, whatever you want to call them, for their housing, for their sense of belonging, for the consistency. There's a lot of different things that one person was for them. And now they have to go into society, and you think, well, go and try to trust somebody. But when your whole life has been people mistreating you, or at least in your head, that's how you've constructed it, with like if you've gone to been let down by foster care, you've been let down by your parents because they gave you up in the first place, or they weren't around, and then maybe somebody from law enforcement or somebody from the government let you down and they harmed you in some way. You're really pretty mistrusting. And that actually is one thing too, that there's so many different things that's in there. There was actually a paper that I had read. I believe it was by Sudhir Venkatesh, and then one of the guys that wrote the Freakonomics books. I can't remember his name, Stephen Levitt, I think, or something like that. And they found that something like, I believe it was 2% of all intercourse that women who were being prostituted in Chicago were having, 2% of that, it was 2 or 3%, was with police officers. And it was either with police officers that had, and I'm not trying to throw shade towards cops, so if there's a cop watching this, I teach criminal justice, please don't come at me. I'm not that guy. I'm just sharing that there is no like, oh, they're off limits, they wouldn't do that to you, right? But it was the police officers either saying like, I'm going to take you in for prostitution unless something goes down here. They threatened them in some other way, or they just forced it, or they paid for it. It was, so that was something that happened. And just because I said like, oh, it's everybody, just to kind of veer away from law enforcement, there was actually, again in Chicago, because this is just where I'm at, there was a dentist who was on Michigan Avenue, which if you don't know Michigan Avenue, it's like the nicest street in Chicago. They have like the Mag Mile where there's all these like really nice shops and stuff. So there was a dentist who was on Michigan Avenue, and he was laundering money for a pimp. He was helping to clean the money up for one of these pimps traffickers. And so why he was doing it, how much he was making, I don't have all the details for it, but it just goes to show you, people who will be involved in this and will look the other way. So it's the people who are purchasing can look the other way. The people who are helping to facilitate cleaning up the money, the traffickers are certainly looking the other way. And then in some cases, the people who are supposed to be keeping you safe, they're looking the other way as well. So again, it can be really hard to tell somebody, go be trusting in society and leave this situation. You're not shackled. And even though you are shackled with the trauma and the psychology of it, go and do this. There's a lot that can be there. So one of the most important things that people can know is human trafficking is an actions and means and a purpose. So again, there's this whole like world of other bad things that happens around human trafficking that, it wasn't human trafficking, but it was still kidnapping or abduction or whatever. But so an actions is going to be harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining an individual. So how we're getting that person, that's the action. The means is probably what people hear most of all: force, fraud, coercion. That's the means of which somebody's being trafficked. Did I use a force to do it? Or did I use the means of coercing them? So like, if you don't do this, I'm going to take your passport away. So you have to go and pick cabbage for the next 6 months and make less than minimum wage and sleep in a roach infested trailer, or you have to go and sleep with these guys because if you don't go and sleep with these guys, I'm going to go and tell your parents what you did, and they're going to be ashamed of you, and then your whole community is going to know. Or did I fraud you into doing it? Like I told you that it was going to be one thing and it was something else. And then when you got here, I kind of pulled the rug out from underneath you. So the actions and the means is there, and then the profit motive. It has to be for the purpose of making a profit. So there's a couple of nuances with that, where if you have somebody who's exchanging a place to stay, and a lot of this you'll see with like homeless youth, right? Where it's called survival sex. Well, somebody will happen upon them, see them vulnerable, and say, "Hey, I'll give you a place to stay. You look like you're doing pretty rough. You can come and stay at my house." And maybe it won't be right away. Maybe it'll be after a couple of days, and they'll be like, "Hey, look, like I'm fine with you staying here, but like I'm helping you out. Can you help me out?" And they're like, "No, I don't want to do that." Well, like, then you can't stay here. And they're like, "Well, now what am I gonna do?" And so then they do it. And the thing is too is like that moves the line on what your standards of acceptability is. That's again part of like, even if they don't know it, they're grooming that person at that point, because when you before you were out on the streets, before you were without housing, you said, "I would never do something like this." And now because of your situation, you've moved it to this. Like, I will have sex with somebody to stay in this house, but I won't do it with anybody else. And then they say, "Hey, look, I got a buddy and I need to make rent, so you're gonna have to sleep with him for, he's gonna pay me $200, and maybe I'll break you off some of it." And you're like, "I don't want to, but what else can I do?" Now when they come in and says, "I've got 3 guys lined up for next week," you're already broken at that point, right? You're already broken and you're isolated, you're separated away from society. And so now after you've done these other ones, now you're just not now you don't like the way that you are. You think that other people don't like the way that you are. You can't possibly believe the people who come up to you on the streets and they say they want to help you out or that they've been in that situation. You're in this world now, and the way that you get out of that, I really can't tell people, "Oh, here's the way that you get out of that." I would be happy to set you up with the executive director lady who actually goes and picks women up from domestic abuse situations, or she gets them while they're literally laying in the streets, or goes with them to court and she stands beside them. I don't know what it takes to be there for somebody to help them come out of that. But I wanted to make sure that I at least said actions means purpose. So the next time that somebody says, "Oh, that's human trafficking," analyze it through that. Was there an action? What is the means? What is the purpose that's taking place there?
Yeah, and with kind of on that note of, I think, sometimes misconceptions, when I hear a lot about women being afraid about trafficking at airports because there's so much of a push also for people who, especially like work in airports, to understand, like you were talking about earlier, the different symptoms or red flags that somebody could be being trafficked. Like when you said, not being able to answer for yourself. And like every
Yep.
time you go through security, they're asking kids, "Where are you going? What's your name?" And
Right.
what exactly does trafficking look like in airports most often?
Yeah, really great question, because a lot of people, I have seen those advertisements, on the like back of the headrest or something like that. I actually had a buddy who was on a trip, and he took a picture of it in the bathroom. It was in like the Florida, like at an airport in Florida. It was in one of the bathrooms, and it said like "see something, say something" kind of thing. Um, I think when you're looking at that, it can be. It can be that somebody who's going to be labor trafficked, that's being flown over, they have their documents, they believe that they're going to a legit situation. So there's really no way to detect that, because they don't even know that they're going to be a labor trafficking victim. Because not most, like I think 50% of identified labor trafficking victims are here documented legally with like H2A, H2B visas. So they have legal documentation to be here in this country, and they get trafficked at the same rate as people who are undocumented. So it's like almost like when everyone's like, "Oh, come here the legal way." It doesn't really serve you if you're trying to avoid being labor trafficked, because you still have just as high a chance of being trafficked, because you're still vulnerable. Because let's be honest, OSHA, the Department of Labor who handles all those visas, they're not really looking out for that, right? Like there's some lip service that's paid to it. They give them a booklet, called the Blue Movement, and state all their rights. But if my family just put their land up, to pay for me to be able to fly over here, and then my trafficker slash employer tells me, "Hey, your H2A visa is tied to your employment here. I'm going to fire you, and then you're going to have to go back to your country, and you just wasted all your money." you're going to let a lot of bad things happen to you. So for labor trafficking, I don't think you're going to really catch any of that. Um, for sex trafficking, what that's going to look like is it could be that the girl's traveling by herself. And I say girl, and I really should be careful with that because something like 8% of 8 to 10%, I believe it is, of identified sex trafficking victims are actually males. So that is a thing that happened as well. But there was actually a case of a girl who started off being trafficked in New York. Then her trafficker had her go down to Philadelphia and then had her come back. Then he flew her all the way out to Vegas. And when she was out in Vegas, you're like, how could she possibly be under his thumb? So he would call her up. He would make sure that she was doing the things that she was supposed to be doing. Um, and would give her money to somebody known as the bottom. So if a trafficker or a pimp ends up having what they call a stable of girls, they'll have somebody that's known as the bottom, which is like the main person who helps them kind of manage the other girls, and that's kind of like the head victim, if you will, right? And so she had to give her money to that person, and so even she got on that plane and she flew all the way out there, even after she had been, forced to sleep with all these different guys or coerced to sleep with all these guys. There was a case of one guy, he was a trafficker in Detroit, flew a girl, I think, out to Hawaii, I want to say, and he would check in on her by having her Snapchat herself. So to make sure that she was out there on the street where he would Snapchat her so that way he would be able to keep a track on where it is that she was at. So uh, for the airports though, if you're, I'm kind of giving more of the sensational stories than and I was like, oh, that's all sensational. But I just want to kind of give some of those examples that are out there. But it's typically going to look like, and again, I say typically because there is no typical thing, right? But it's going to be somebody who's going to be more quiet and submissive. Usually, they're not going to be saying that much. If you're going to be able to identify it, like I think people might have heard of the case of the lady from Delta, the stewardess. I think Alaskan Airlines had one as well, where they identified a girl who was trafficking or who was being trafficked. And so again, it's going to be that they're not really saying that much. They might walk behind that person. So like if you see like a dad and his daughter or like a couple that kind of walk next to each other, but if you see somebody who's walking behind all the time, they're being very quiet, they never answer for themselves. It's again the same thing with the red flags. You're going to have to stack up those red flags to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And if you think you're going to ask this person, are you being trafficked? Do you want me to help you? If you ask that out loud, you're putting that person in so much harm because, of course, they can't say anything in front of their trafficker, right? I mean, if a police officer or a doctor asked them, they still wouldn't say anything right in front of that because that person can harm them, especially if they leave that situation. And then now they're really in a tough spot. So the way that I think that people have actually tried to help them out is that they would like hand them a note, right? Or they would like leave something in the bathroom stall when they saw that girl was going toward the bathroom. They would leave something in there to, they very secretively see if they needed some kind of assistance or something. Because in those cases, you can't stand by somebody. And in that instance, it's like, do you need me to get somebody to help get you out of that situation? And in some cases, it might be happening, and they're going to say no. So it really is, unfortunately, for a lot of people, you're not going to be able to be a part of rescuing people or even standing by them to get them out of trafficking, right? Like there's, people get upset and they want to grab their pitchforks and they're going to go march on Pizzagate, or they're going to go to where it is, if you were going to go and try to rescue somebody, the best that you would be able to do is to go to a massage parlor because there's women that are being trafficked out of there all the time. But you could also go down to the track and you think you could rescue somebody, but you can't because the systems are set in place so that you can't do that. And because I just keep going into stories, I just want to give this. I know somebody who was a probation officer in the city of Chicago for years. She worked strictly with juveniles. And when she would go to meet with the juvenile girls, she's a probation officer. They are not dedicating, Chicago has like 13,000 police officers. They're not dedicating all these services to helping take care of these youth. And when you think about who these youth are, they're young black girls that are coming from lower socioeconomic areas. They're not what the city's concerned about. typically the city is diverting resources away from those communities to go to other places. And so this probation officer, who was very caring, she would go down there, and when she would, I just call them tracks because that's what people know them as. When she would go there, she's dealing with these girls. Now, why are they on probation? Did they get picked up for illegally, being involved in commercial sex? And this is, a couple years ago, so it was before the laws got involved, and they said that you couldn't be a juvenile, a prostitute. There was no such thing, or there is no such thing at that time. There was, and so she's down there trying to visit these girls from being victimized, and she would have to call their pimps in advance, and pimps, traffickers. She'd have to call them in advance so that she could meet with the girls because she didn't go down there with a weapon and there was no backup. They weren't even allocating a police officer to go with her. So for her to try to reach out to these girls to try to help them successfully navigate probation so they don't get incarcerated or help them successfully reintegrate back into society, she's having to visit them while they're out there selling themselves or being forced to sell themselves and having to talk to the pimps to be able to go there. And so I just want to throw out for people too, like if you're like, oh my God, I keep saying pimp instead of trafficker, I keep saying pimp instead of trafficker. That's what's happening a lot. Even in the massage parlors, like they're traffickers, but they're kind of acting as pimps in the sense that they're facilitating finding people to come to these different places, and they're holding them there through coercive forces. And again, it's different people that are being trafficked. Where if you look out on in the streets or in a brothels or even escort services, you might find that it's more U.S. citizens. Whereas in those massage parlors, it's very heavily foreign and mostly women from Asian countries. So again, I don't want to go off. I know you had some other questions. Sorry.
No, and I think it's interesting because a lot of people associate like trafficking in airports with these like wild stories of there being like drugging under bathroom stalls and then being kidnapped. And I think people sometimes also forget, like, you had said at the beginning of the episode, you think through that, where if you have a plane ticket to a certain destination, how is somebody going to go randomly, grab you in the airport and take you? Or let's say you get to your destination, yeah, maybe they could kidnap you, but again, like you explained, a lot of times, more often than not, it's going to be somebody being moved through an airport in some way or another. So I think that's a
Yeah,
good clarification.
yeah, and I would even say like the airport case is going to be really rare. If you're looking, a lot of, and this is again another report from Polaris because they're just so great with the reports. Most sex trafficking victims have been in a cab or an Uber at some point in time while they were being trafficked. So if there's somebody that's going to identify them, it's not going to be a pilot or a stewardess. It's most likely going to be somebody driving Uber, somebody who's a taxi driver. Most women who are still being sex trafficked have come into contact with a healthcare provider while they were being trafficked, whether that was to treat a broken bone, some sort of illness, ailment, STD. They're going to get an abortion. So it's something like 86, 88%, depending on which studies you're looking at, have come in contact with a healthcare provider. Like 90% came in contact with a taxi cab or an Uber driver. Which little story about Uber. I drove Uber 5 years ago. Maybe no more than that. It was like no, I did it 5 years ago. I think I started 8 years ago, and I did it off and on for a little while. But when I was driving Uber, I'm a very talkative person, as people can tell. But when I was doing Uber, I was like, I'm just wasting my time because I'm not doing anything to fight against human trafficking. And I kid you not, I wish I would have brought it up here with me. I have it in my basement right now, but I bought a headrest from Amazon, and I bought a placard which was like about the size of a 4x6 picture from Office Max or something. And then I made my own thing. I went on Canva, love Canva, and I made my little thing that said "Ask your driver about how you can get a free Starbucks gift card." And I bought $5 Starbucks gift card with my own money. Um, Kept them in my car because I knew people would need like instant gratification to do my thing. And so it had a little barcode. I made a quiz on SurveyMonkey, and I had that on either headrest. And so when people would get in, yeah, they were weirded out. Like this was like I was stretching it. But I made a quiz on human trafficking. It was just 4 questions, and I told people if you get 3 of those 4 questions right, I'll give you a $5 gift card. And the whole idea was to get them talking about human trafficking. And then once they found out that I was like a criminal justice professor too, because I was an adjunct, then they were like a little bit more disarmed. They were like, "Oh, okay, like you're not just some like dude who did a deep Reddit drive and you want to like tell me all about the cabal or something. Um, so they would go and take the quiz and they would be really interested. And some of them, like, I would stop and go to drop them off their destination. And then we would just be having a conversation for like another 10 minutes about human trafficking. And I only did that for a little bit, but just some of the feedback that I got on it was one guy's mom, this guy was like, 50 or something, but his mom earlier in life had run a domestic abuse shelter in San Diego before human trafficking was kind of like this big catchphrase thing. And she had a lot of women that would come in there that were trafficking victims because they didn't have anywhere else to go. And this is still true today because there's only so many aftercare services for survivors, and most of them are targeted at youth or very young women. Like some of them have like conditions that you can't be pregnant. Some of them have conditions that you have to be willing to go back into school and stuff like that. So um, and then another lady that I talked to, she was in the banking sector, and she was actually charged with trying to find human trafficking within the supply chains of different large scale like holders or large scale corporate partners that they had. So just because I put this sign with a Walgreens picture that happened to have a barcode on there, and I was willing to talk to people, there was all these little different instances of people that were trying to fight against it, and so now fast forward 5-6 years later, whatever it is, now I'm making a rideshare course uh, to educate rideshare drivers on how to identify human trafficking or whatever. So it's just one of those interesting things that ends up taking place. So, and if anybody's interested in any of these courses, like my partner and I, we made a hospitality course because also sex trafficking victims will stay in hotels, motels. There's a pretty decently high amount, even if they're not being trafficked out of those hotels, motels. As they're traveling to different places, they will stay at a hotel. And so there's a chance so again, more of a chance for somebody, a cleaning lady at a hotel or a receptionist to identify somebody, right, as being a trafficking victim or Uber or taxi, more than there's going to be a stewardess. Just because, but sadly, most individuals are going to be moved by the trafficker themselves within the trafficker's car, as opposed to taking the risk of Uber or something like that. So,
Yeah. Well, and kind of going back a little bit to the kidnappings that'll happen.
mhm.
When somebody is scouting, say at like a mall, and I think you said it's like 16% are through kidnapping. So for that smaller
Yeah,
percentage, like when somebody's scouting to look for a victim, are they kind of looking like you mentioned with that young girl, I think it was that the woman was targeting, and she was more like kept to herself. She seemed like she was like, I think you explained like her body language. Is that kind of what
yeah.
they're looking for, like when they're scouting for those kidnapping scenarios?